Good to see y'all. Okay. We have a few folks signed up to speak today. If you want to speak and you haven't signed up, we're just going to put the list. Mr. Love, if you'll put the list down at the front corner there, and we'll give everybody a minute to sign up, and then we'll get started in just a few minutes. I'm no longer a committee chair of a regular committee, and when I was, I always started with a prayer, so we're going to start this one with a prayer as well. Lord, we thank you for an opportunity to serve you as we serve others. We pray that you would give us wisdom and guidance and discernment as we go through each day, and especially as this process is put before us to take into consideration what's in the best interest of our state and our community. Pray that you'd help us as we endeavor to do your will in everything we touch. In Christ's name I pray, amen. All right, folks. Let me just go over briefly the resolution forming this committee, not to waste your time, but just to kind of help us focus on what we're here to do today. We have 4 specific tasks that we're set out for us in the resolution. First, to review the current status of civics education in the state of Georgia. And so we're going to start today in just a moment with the presentation from the Department of Education to talk about the current status. And second, to review other states' methods for delivering civics education in their respective states. Third, to review any work that nonprofit civics education providers are currently doing in our state or nationwide. And finally, to make recommendations. So the first one is pretty easy. We're going to get that information from the department, as I mentioned. The other two are really the focus of any public comment should be on what other states are doing or what nonprofit civics education providers are currently doing here or elsewhere. And so that's kind of the focus for what we're going to get started on here today. So let me start with is Dr. McGibney here? Okay. Hi, welcome.
I'm Caitlin Dooley, Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, and I have for you a handout, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I'll go ahead and warn everybody in advance that Mr. Chairman Coleman has told me that if anybody talks too long, he's just going to turn off his hearing aid. So
Okay, got it. That's why I did it one pager. So we received some general questions about what was happening in our high schools and in all of our K-12 schools regarding civics. So one of the questions was, what do we cover in civics? And that is our high school civics class. We basically cover various systems of government, political philosophies that shaped the development of U.S. constitutional government, the framing and structure of the U.S. Constitution, the organization and powers of the national government, the federal system of government described in the U.S. Constitution, the meaning and importance of each of the rights guaranteed under the Bill of Rights and how each is secured, civil liberties and civil rights, the legislative branch of government, the impeachment and removal process and its use for federal officials as defined in the U.S. Constitution, the functions of the departments and the agencies of the federal bureaucracy, the tools used to carry out U.S. foreign policy, the criminal justice process, the operation of the judicial branch of government, local, state, and national elections, the difference between involuntary and voluntary participation in civic life, and the organization and powers of state and local government described in the Georgia Constitution. So those are all covered in the high school civics course. We also cover government and civics in the high school U.S. history course. Those topics include the ideological, military, social, and diplomatic aspects of the American Revolution, specific events and key ideas that brought about the adoption and implementation of the U.S. Constitution, the challenges faced by the first 5 presidents and how they responded, the significance of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, as well as the significance of the 18th and 19th Amendments. We also have civics wrapped through all of our K-8 social studies courses. Some of the main topics that are included in those include good citizenship, positive character traits, patriotism, the concept of government and the need for rules and laws, elected officials and the executive branch and where they work, elements of representative democracy, the Republic in the United States, the importance of Americans sharing certain central democratic beliefs and principles, both personal and civic, the importance of freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, natural rights, the preamble to the U.S. Constitution, the federal system of government in the U.S., and the representative democracy of Republic of the U.S. The structure of government and the Bill of Rights is also covered, and how a citizen's rights are protected under the U.S. Constitution are covered. The process by which amendments to the U.S. Constitution are made and how amendments to the U.S. Constitution have maintained a representative democracy and republic are covered. Citizen participation in various forms of governments around the world are described, and students have to understand the foundations of Georgia's government, the role of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches in Georgia, and how the Georgia court system treats juvenile offenders, as well as the role of local governments in the state of Georgia. When I get back to the office, I'll follow up with this document, which lays out all of the different standards from grades K through 12 related to civics and government. It's a multi-page document, so I didn't want to hamper you with it today. Another question that was asked are what topics of the U.S. citizenship exam are covered in civics. Basically, the official citizenship test has 100 questions from which they might pull the actual examination questions. The committee that looked at this identified 56 of the questions directly related to the high school American government and civic standards in GSE. So in other words, about 56% of the 100 questions are covered in that U.S. history and civics standards in the Georgia Standards of Excellence. The remaining questions cover the U.S. history items and the general U.S. knowledge, such as symbols, holidays, much of which are covered in the high school U.S. history course in GSE. Does that make sense? So we cover about 56% in the civics class, and the other 44% are covered in U.S. history. Another question that was asked of us in preparation for this are what civics topics are tested as part of the Milestones Social Studies exam. The high school U.S. history course contains government and civics topics that are assessed on the United States History Milestone Assessment. The topics include standards in the following domains: colonization through the Constitution, the New Republic through Reconstruction, and the establishment as a world power. These domains represent 60% of the milestones test, and the specific standards related to government and civics represent approximately 30% of those standards, which is roughly about 18% of the U.S. history milestone assessment. The Georgia Department of Education Social Studies team, in partnership with the Georgia Center for Civic Engagement, has developed a voluntary civic engagement program. We are still fleshing out the ideas of that program. Several ideas have been pitched, and we're still looking at the details of that and working with the superintendent for that purpose. The Georgia Civics School of Excellence school banner program would be similar to our STEAM and STEM schools, where schools can apply to be a Georgia Civics School of Excellence, and they would have certain characteristics that they could show their implementation of this, and then they could get a banner. And we do have other banners that are given out to schools, and they like to show their pride in the things that they do with those banners placed in the front of their schools. We also have an idea for the Georgia Civic Engagement Diploma Seal. We have several diploma seals that go out to our school systems, and students fulfill particular requirements depending on what a committee agrees on, and we could possibly do a diploma seal for students who are particularly civically engaged. Each of those options could involve an assessment that's given once students complete their high school high school American Government Civics course, and the assessment questions could be taken from the actual U.S. Citizenship and Immigration test, and that would cover about 56% of the 100 items. We are also working to develop ideas for integrating service learning projects, which we know result in more civic engagement. And we also want to help students understand how they can use their civic engagement to solve real-world problems by applying that transferable knowledge and skills that they're learning in their school classes. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. I was always pretty good in history and social studies and civics, but I was never good in math. And I've got to ask you to explain the last sentence of paragraph 4 that says, these domains represent 60% of the test, and the specific standards related to government civics represent approximately 30% of those standards, which is roughly 18% of the United States History Milestone Assessment. I don't understand that.
Okay.
Can you help me?
Yes. So when you're developing a test, you have particular domains. So let's say you have a test with maybe 4 domains that you're looking for. In those domains, then you cover particular standards. So in one domain, I may be talking about mapping skills, for example. I may cover 20 different standards under that domain. That's not to say that that standard may not show up in another domain, okay? And then from those standards, I can design test items, and then I have my test item bank. Then when I develop my test, I can only have so many items, and I also have to pull the items based on their difficulty, because I can't have one test form much more difficult than another. So it ends up being, you have to have a certain weighting of the domains. So if you have 4 domains, they may each weigh 25%. One of them may weigh more than that. One of them may weigh less. But then you have to have a particular number of items in relation. So when we say there's a percentage related to the domain, that's the weight. And when I say that it's representative of a particular number of items, that's the number of items in the test. But you may have an item that weighs more because it's a more important piece of knowledge and skill that we are trying to reinforce.
That helps me understand.
I hope that
that helps me understand. Can you explain then this the last part that those standards, which is roughly 18% of the United States History Milestone Assessment?
So that means it's about 18% of the items in the last one. One of the confusing things with this, which may be why you're also confused, is because the weighting of domains may change year over year. So we were looking at this previous year too.
Okay.
So in the previous year, it was 18% of the items.
Any questions? Representative Chandler.
Thank you for being
Sure.
here. I am interested in your civic engagement program. And is that already in place in our schools? You mentioned the banners being there.
So I would say that it is in place in ad hoc basis. We do have some schools that are engaging in this way of celebrating their civic engagement. But what we don't have is a systematic statewide program. And so we can pull from some of the best school programs and develop a statewide program. That's something that we would like to do. It's something that we've talked about doing. And so we would love to continue to develop that idea.
That sounds good to me. How would a school prove its civic engagement?
Well, so we have been batting around ideas related to this. Let me see if I can find that piece. So basically what we were thinking, and this is not set in stone, is that it would be voluntary. High schools would pledge to meet particular requirements, and we would have to develop those requirements with them and get feedback from a focus group and all of that. But as we were thinking about what that could look like, the district may have, or the school may agree that all students enrolled in the American Government U.S. Civics course during the academic year will participate in the American Government Basic Skills Test. In other words, the test would not be given to selected groups, but given to all students. Or the district or school may agree that to participate in the Civic Engagement Diploma SEAL program, the other ideas that have come to life are service learning capstone projects that students could engage in, and you could have a particular number of students who are doing those kinds of capstone projects. We do have some schools that are doing that on a large scale. Some schools are doing projects where they're engaging their local government. So when they do their projects, they're actually presenting to their local government to solve real-world problems. So again, this is all, we're still working with ideas, and we would have to pull a committee together and really flesh it out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Of course, I know American history, whatever, in the social studies areas, we have an end-of-course test for what, one area, and that's what?
We have an end-of-course test for U.S. history.
That's the only area.
Actually, no, we also have an end-of-course test for economics.
Okay, but we do not have an end-of-course test for our civics as such.
Not currently.
Not currently. So when we're saying the milestone, that's, you're saying 18% of the milestone questions are in the area of social studies, civics, whatever, American history, right?
Government and civics.
Government, right,
specific.
okay, 18%.
Yeah.
So what you do, you pull some of those questions out of the civics course that's offered, but that, even though they don't have an end-of-course test, that's right?
Actually, those questions are covered in the U.S. history course.
Okay, they're in the, so the civics component is in there, okay. In there.
Yes, and civics is wrapped all the way through. That's why I'll send this to you.
Yeah, I saw that,
It's
yeah.
wrapped all the way through. So, so I'm not sure that having it just in one course is going to be indicative. I have here, and I'll send this to you electronically too. This is going to be very difficult for you to understand because honestly, like I said, the domain weights change over time, so it's difficult to compare the milestones domain weights year over year without knowing the psychometrics behind it.
Right.
But what I can see when I look at the metrics is I can see civics understandings in 5th grade when we have that milestones
Right.
assessment. I can see it in 8th grade, and then I can also see it in our U.S. history course. So I can actually see a trajectory over time of students learning in this particular area.
Mr. Chairman, if I may push. One other thing we're pushing also, we're talking about are the soft skills. Of course,
Yes.
that's civics too.
Exactly.
The good citizenship, showing up on time, thank you, a good neighbor, clean up, that kind of stuff. And there, of course, that's offered, the soft skills we're talking about that are so important that the businesses are saying we're missing. You're telling me they're offered in all courses.
They should be,
Language
yes.
arts, whatever. Is that correct?
Yes.
And are they things like that? I don't know how you would test that, but I guess are we trying to test the soft skills?
That's a great question because there was just an article published on
Right.
that in EdWeek. We are not currently testing soft skills because we do not currently have a valid and reliable assessment for those soft skills, and nor do any other states.
No.
So that's an area that I know several research organizations are working on.
Right.
But I have yet to find a valid and reliable assessment, and that would make me pause.
You know, that's the big buzzword now everywhere, and all businesses, industries using that.
And we
as
would
we've
love
had
to
these
do
meetings
that.
around the state, that's
Yeah.
what they've been saying. The soft skills the businesses saying are missing,
Yeah.
and it's trying to find out where and how. I mean, how
So
do you,
the-
do you
The word that has
assess?
come up.
Assess. Thank you, please.
Yeah. The word that has come up is competencies.
Okay,
And we
yeah.
do have some
Okay.
districts that do a really good job of assessing these competencies through projects.
Okay.
So while it's not everybody stop, drop, and take a multiple choice test, we do have teachers and school leaders who are using competencies and understanding how kids are doing on their projects with the soft skills, and they have a good understanding of how the kids are matriculating through and developing those soft skills.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Dr. Dooley, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Speaking of time, I will point out that Dr. Dooley made her presentation in 6 minutes and 41 seconds. And the rest of that time was eaten by questions. So that's a great mark for everybody else to shoot for. Next, let me see. We have a Commissioner Nancy Jester sign up to speak. Come on, right?
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you. So I am Commissioner Nancy Jester. I'm Commissioner for District 1 in DeKalb County. I represent the municipalized areas of Dunwoody, Brookhaven, Chamblee, Dorville, and the newly formed city of Tucker. I have a tiny bit of unincorporated DeKalb as well. But I'm not talking to you here because I'm a commissioner. I'm talking to you because I'm a parent of 3 children in public schools. I have children in 9th, 7th, and 5th grade. I'm incredibly familiar with the social studies or civics education within the public school system that we have had to endure. And I say endure because it has been a challenge to deprogram my children daily when they come home with their heads filled with crazy thoughts. It's not an accident that we have Antifa. It is not an accident that we have threatening groups out there. In fact, when I did not express sufficient sympathy to certain people, my family, my sons in particular, were threatened to be shot by a local arm of Black Lives Matter. They posted on Twitter. Homeland Security had to get involved, and we had to have special security at my children's schools. So I'm very much interested in civic discourse because I've certainly borne the brunt of some of these unusual groups. So one of the things I'm going to speak to you about as a parent is something that just changed this year, but I'm going to go back to last year. And this is something that you can find even today and print it out from the DOE's website. And it is the Georgia standards. This is for 3rd grade, so I've had all 3 of my children go to school under this particular framework. Now, this is the new one, and this is the 5th grade framework. So this is particularly important because my 5th grader today had this 3rd grade curriculum, and now he's going to have the new 5th grade curriculum. And basically, we've just seen a shell game go on by the Department of Education. Now, I realize that we just heard from a DOE expert, and we heard the words to this honorable subcommittee that this will be difficult for you to understand, and I'm sorry you're confused. We're not confused. I'm not confused, and you understand math completely well. When they start telling you that we're confused and that we won't understand something, you need to pay attention because that is babble. First of all 3 of my children have endured this 3rd grade curriculum, which includes strands on government and civics. What they teach you is not the linear path of history. You don't learn this happened, the Boston Tea Party, Declaration of Independence, Revolution. You don't learn, as we did, this linear progression of history with these certain facts. You learn it from an ideological perspective. And in fact, before ever talking about the Bill of Rights, because that wasn't mentioned in the curriculum in third grade or any previous grade, what they do is they talk about the important people who expanded rights and freedoms in our democracy. So they don't define what a right is. They don't say we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. They don't talk about where our rights come from. In fact, the implication of the subtext is completely and wholly that they come from somebody who had to get them, and the subtext of that is somebody was withholding them from you. And so the 9 important people that my children have learned about in third grade now, and now my third grader will have to repeat in 5th grade, are the following: Paul Revere, Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, Mary McLeod Bethune, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, Thurgood Marshall, Lyndon Johnson, and Cesar Chavez. We will explain social barriers, restrictions, obstacles that these historical figures had to overcome, and we will describe how they overcame them. So tacit involved in that is that somehow the imperfection of the American system, rather than simply describe the American system, here's where it started, here's what we said, here are the people that said it, and go forward. I mean, a third grader can't contextualize the issues around the society that Thomas Jefferson lived in or others of that era. But this is what they're forced to learn. And inevitably, in every single year that my children were subjected to this, they were then told they had to dress up as one of these particular 9 important people that expanded your rights. Now, I have a daughter and 2 sons. Now, my daughter her self-esteem is intact, and she doesn't need to have Susan B. Anthony to have to emulate to know that she's worth something. She can well learn about Thomas Jefferson, understand and contextualize what's going on there, and feel proud about who she is. But we're teaching identity politics. We just stopped this year in 3rd grade. But that's okay, because we moved it to 5th grade. Because now, those types of things in the civics unit, they will be taught, so they move some things around, the importance of key people and events between 1950 and 75. And here's A through D. We're going to analyze Jim Crow. We're going to explain the civil rights movement, Brown versus Board of Education, the Montgomery bus boycott, civil rights, voting rights, Thurgood Marshall, Lyndon Johnson, Cesar Chavez, Rosa Parks, and MLK. And then we're going to understand the impact of the assassinations of JFK, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. Nowhere, and again, these 9 important people in 3rd grade that have just sort of been sprinkled now throughout the new pathways, new framework, nowhere in there's no, hey, thanks Ronald Reagan for winning the Cold War and all that entailed. There's, it's just really difficult to understand how we got from the time when I was in an elementary school and learning this is what happened here, this is what happened there, without the commentary that we're getting. So it's not, we're teaching about feelings and framing issues with this social lens rather than just sort of a linear progression of facts. I got a call just the other day from a firefighter in Fannin County who asked me if I had seen or had my children had to sign a No Place for Hate document, which he felt was a bullying statement from adults to children, and wondering, is thought crime going to come next? So if his kid just expresses Judeo-Christian values, were they going to somehow be penalized, and would that be hate speech, and now he's violated the No Place for Hate? So it's very difficult to be a parent raising children to engage civically correctly, to know where their rights come from, that they are endowed by their Creator, which is not a religious statement whatsoever, but they don't come from man. I no more have my rights because any other person existed than you do. And that was always the case. We weren't perfect about recognizing that, but we are forming a more perfect union. But it's not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be a union if we continue to divide everybody with the social guilt that we are peddling in our curriculum. I'm not confused. You're not confused. And things are not difficult to understand. So I appreciate the attempt to muddy the waters, but I hope that this subcommittee will take back to the legislature a very strong call for a serious review, not a shell game, of our social studies curriculum and what we're teaching our children and how that needs to be changed. And I am really surprised that we don't have more leadership here, elected leadership from school systems and the Department of the DOE. I'd like to know how many commissioners, representatives, state senators, how many elected officials or parents were asked to participate in the development of any of their standards over time. You know, I'm not clear that we've really had a seat at the table in developing them in any effective way. So those are my statements. As a parent or as a commissioner, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your comments. Does anybody have any questions? There are no questions from the board. I appreciate you being here, and I certainly can identify with the concerns you've expressed. And I think a lot of parents have similar concerns, and that's part of the reason we're here today.
Well, I applaud you. Thank you for doing your work. I look forward to.
Before you go, just a moment, please. Chairman Coleman.
I just want to be sure you understand this too. One thing the legislature has tried to do over the last 7 years is, because we've been hearing from school systems, we want local control. We want to make our own decisions. The what, state. The how we do it, who we pick, the names of the people, we want that to be a local decision. So what we have done, and you're from DeKalb County, is that?
That's correct. I live in Dunwoody and DeKalb
But the
County.
DeKalb school system. So
That's
what we
correct.
did, 180 school systems, 178 of them chose either charter systems or strategic systems, complete flexibility and freedom. And state does not even recommend books anymore. You know, they stop that. They don't recommend. Again, they set the standards through a certain committee process. And I hope you were invited. I mean, I know every so many years they look at each content area. But you are aware that a lot of the things you commented on, which I agree with you. I mean, I want to agree with you, but a lot of that's a local decision too. And I wondered how involved you've been with your local board and your local superintendent. Have you been really involved?
So,
with that?
you know, I served on the school board, and my
Oh,
husband
good,
is
okay.
my husband is currently a school board representative
Okay,
in
that's
DeKalb
it.
County as well. And these are from the state. These are the state, and the books that
Okay.
my children have in their school system
Okay.
align to these things.
Okay.
I will also say that I'd love local control, but I would ask this, and this is not necessarily in the context of exactly civics, but if 100% of children failed tests in DeKalb County and 100% of kids failed to graduate in DeKalb County, what
Yeah.
would happen? Nothing, because local control. So local
Yeah.
control is wonderful,
Yeah.
but in fact, we have to have some guardrails, and states that are much
Yeah.
higher functioning
Right.
and much more conservative than us, like Texas, actually
Yeah.
do. And
Yeah.
school districts that don't perform dissolve.
Yeah.
School states, they dissolve school districts. They do so every
Yeah,
year in the
yeah.
state of Texas.
Well, as a former board member, you asked for that. I mean, you board members had said, stop telling us what to do, give us some money.
No, sir. I've always asked
Well,
for
maybe
you to
you, but-
mandate when you say 65% of the
Yeah.
money ought to go
Yeah.
into the classroom.
Yeah.
I actually want 65
Well, I
or more
agree.
to, and it doesn't. And our people get waivers, and we get
Yes.
class size waivers,
Yes.
so we shoehorn
Yeah,
52
yeah,
kids.
I agree. And
in the
see, I don't
school
want, I'm not
districts.
going to
It's
be arguing,
terrible.
but I'm saying you could do that now. And see, that's what I'm saying. To me, DeKalb County, if you want to have 3 in the classroom, you could. And I'm saying that's a local decision. You as a board member should have that. And we had completely mandated, thing. We said you'll put this many, you'll do this, you'll teach this, you use. Used to you couldn't even buy but books we recommended. And so we moved. Maybe we've gone too far the other way.
When you have rogue school districts, essentially, which is what you have,
But I'm saying maybe we've
yeah.
gone too far the other way. Is that what you're saying, you think?
I'm saying that if you're successful, and we can define what
Yeah.
success means,
Yes.
offline. But when you're a successful school district, I say, sure, more power to you. But when you are demonstrably and in every way
Yes, ma'am.
not successful, why doesn't the state put the guardrails on?
That's why I'm asking you a question. You see,
Yeah.
you're saying you think we've gone too far the other way,
For failing school districts, yes.
and you do know about the alternative, the turnaround officer. What we're doing, looking at these failing schools now. The new legislation we did pass.
I am intimately aware of all the
Are you
legislation
proud of
with
that? Do you like
education.
that? You think that's the right direction?
It's not nearly enough. I'd be happy to tell you what you should do offline.
Come over, see me afterwards. Let's talk about it.
I would be
I appreciate
I would
that.
be happy to, because there are many states that have that are maybe even what would consider far more conservative bona fides in the state of Georgia, and they have local control. But if you don't meet this standard, they come in.
Well, that's what we're doing. That's what we're looking at doing. If you don't, but then get with me after this.
I
show
will
and
be
talk.
happy to.
I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for your
And
time.
of course, to that
Thank you.
point,
Yes,
we really have made efforts in the last couple of years to put more of those guardrails on, and the voters of this state rejected
Yeah.
that proposal.
Well, and I
At the ballot. It was a proposal I carried in the House, and I was very disappointed.
I
But
was
that's
very-
the way the voters spoke in Georgia, and
Yeah.
we have another measure that we've just passed, and the governor signed into law. Hopefully, it's a watered-down version, but hopefully that'll give us some of the help that we need.
Yeah, I support any and all efforts to rein in these rogue districts. Most districts are not rogue districts, okay, but you do have some that are major beneficiaries of the funding that you send to them, and the state taxpayers are getting a bad deal in some of these districts. So I think we need to look at that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Next up is, and by the way, I wrote down as she was speaking, Commissioner Jester finished at about 8 minutes and 2 seconds. I am keeping a score. Ken Kraft is next.
Might need some help setting up the PowerPoint. I'm going to present off PowerPoint.
Okay.
This is going to be a highlight of things that are in that binder. There's all sorts of other resources, but I'm going to skip through some of the slides. Whoa. While we're getting set up here, one thing in the binder as far as outside groups that have done a lot, I've got you a binder from the National Association of Scholars. They've done a recent study on civics being taught in college. And
These are your binders down here. Let me get Joyce.
don't look at them now, please. Because I've already stripped that down from last night. But there's all sorts of data in there for light reading tonight or some other night. But this has some excellent recommendations on their suggestions in there, and that's definitely a good outside group. Okay. You got to make two-dimensional, looking here and looking there. I call this civics education in Georgia, and you can't see it yet.
Still coming up, but don't worry, I haven't started the timer on you yet.
Okay. Well, I thought maybe I could take some of those extra minutes from the education speaker at the beginning to make up my 10.
Well, it's not like Congress.
Oh, it's not, okay.
No, those minutes are gone.
Oh, you can't yield back, okay.
No, we consume them. Okay, you ready?
Okay, yeah. I call
Timer's
this
going.
Civic Education Perceptions and Realities. And my wife and I have been working with this group, Georgians for Educational Sovereignty, for 4 or 5 years. We've presented to Brooks and Joyce several times, starting with Common Core, and this is going to focus on civics. I call this perception and reality. Perception is sort of what we think is happening, and reality is largely a different story, and we'll see some of that today. The Lincoln quote is always apropos, but now more than ever. What they teach in the school is the philosophy of government in the next year, and I'm terribly concerned that we are educating Water's World people and not doing a good job and scared for our country. That's the agenda, what's wrong, the perception, reality, and then some resources and suggested actions.
Can I give you just a little suggestion?
Sure.
You might want to skip right to the suggestions. I mean, because it looks like you got a lot of material, and I'd hate for you to get cut off in the middle of telling us what the problems are and not get the suggestions.
Okay, I'm gonna skip through.
Okay.
Yep. But that's my resume. Mainly, I'm an MBA. I analyze situations. I stand back and see what's really going on, and I've done that on a number of issues. I've done a lot of presentations, about 50 groups on Georgia's educational sovereignty, and I just spoke to the school board last week about the AP invasion, as I see it. Guidance, what should be looking for in social studies? There are various things, but the last one I think is one of the strongest from the GOP standing resolution last year. They got standing ovation. They want to chart a bold course to redirect efforts in U.S. and world history to restore firm knowledge of Western civilization, American exceptionalism, as well as a sense of patriotism. And that's sort of the best summary I've seen of what the people want. And again, that got a standing ovation at the convention. Civics, of course, is duties of citizens and how the government works. What's wrong? Of course, we've all watched Water's World with amazement as he interviews college students, their lack of knowledge about the Constitution. And now we've had, is that blurry or my ass bad? All the statue removals and protests against free speech. And one writer says part of the problem for this is that the civics education programs are not doing a good job of educating our students, and we're paying to indoctrinate students, especially through some of the Common Core and advanced placement books that I've looked at. The new survey probably came out, just 51% of the students believe shouting is an acceptable response to someone speaking, and 19% say violence is okay. So obviously not learning about. You've seen the old how to make a bill. I've seen three basic things of how things run at the Department of Education over my last 4 or 5 years. First, the BOE duties, they're supposed to control everything from courses to standards. That's delivered through the course list of all the books. That's the Bible, not books, all the courses, what's required. And then the standards, they're all public, and I've studied those a lot. Here's one of the issues, and the civics. Civics is just one of 4 strands: history, geography, civics, and economics. So I don't think we're putting enough emphasis on it. Is geography the same value as civics? This was the 5th grade place where it is mentioned. So there's the point on that. So when you look through the class, we start out good in kindergarten. My granddaughter's learning the Pledge of Allegiance, very good. And but in middle school, the last official civics thing is in 5th grade. Then in middle school, we go straight into international stuff. No U.S. citizenship in there. And everything waits for high school, called government and civics, the class we heard about today. Well, that's fine, except that a lot of people opt out of that to the AP liberal version of that, like they do for AP history. So that's one of the biggest flaws. So a lot of outside influences. The Common Core textbooks that present a lot of anti-American issues, and that's delivered to the students in their English classes every day, day in, day out. College Board, revisionist AP history class, the APUSH, U.S. history, and 7 other social studies classes they revised. And then I went through the social studies standards battle in 2016, and that was not a pleasant process. I'll talk about that in a minute. For example, there's a book on religious freedom for 5th graders that says, it's a debate class allegedly for 5th graders, the more involved religion and government are, the more corruption and bloodshed are likely to exist. The same class has a book debating military issues, asking when is torture okay, and are we fighting for corporations? This is a 12th grade English language arts book, asking people in English to look at literature through a Marxist critical lens, talking about Marx. So, at the College Board, the first thing, does the board set the standards? No. Every time the advanced placement comes in, they send a new course and they change the standards. David Coleman is the new president of the College Board. If you're not familiar with him, he's a left-wing extremist, and there's a video in there for him. I'm going to spare you the video in the interest of time, but it gives you good insights on who he is. The College Board is an issue because in AP, in the middle, they control everything. They write the exam, they do the standards, they require textbooks, they require the syllabus to be approved by the teacher, and they train our teachers in Athens every June, and we give them continuing education credits for being indoctrinated by the advanced placement. Their AP is probably fine for STEM courses, but in social studies issues, I have big problems with them. In fact, a lot of the people always tend to brag after the fact. A big Pearson textbook executive admits that a lot of Common Core and AP people were attempting to minimize the Constitution and remove Christianity, but make sure that we include Islam. A lot of courses changed, not just advanced placement. This was a new English ELA book, and it has a lot of articles in there like our imbecilic Constitution, the Star Spangled Banner. They read about the Star Spangled Banner, but then there's a big debate. Is it too bloody? Let's change it. Maybe America or maybe this land is your land. Debate, come back and talk about it. AP History, this was a Gwinnett County book. When we were presenting to the Gwinnett Commission about one of the bad books, they didn't even have a picture of the Vietnam Wall in the chapter on Vietnam. Very unpatriotic and very bad support of our veterans. Second list, the course list, that's supposed to be the Bible, but when you look through the list, there's the required Georgia government and civics class, but you can opt out of it if you take AP government and politics. So someone in the DOE tower rubber stamps these approvals without any review that I'm aware of, because they change the standards every time they change the framework from the College Board in New York City, and that is wrong. This is the AP government class. You can see in the middle, they talk about the 4 institutions of government. It's not the 3 branches of government, it's the 4 institutions of government. This is the AP book they use in Gwinnett County, which I bought and studied. And you start off right away, how should we govern? It's a democracy. No, we're not a democracy. That's the mob. We're a constitutional republic. I always do an index check to see what the book is like. I look for de Tocqueville and the Federalist Papers, and you can see their treatment versus the social issues in this AP government book. Also, they want you to get involved in things, and one of the issues here, they ask you to, you might as well contact Acorn and see how they can you can involve with them. But they're going to revise this class again, allegedly do all these great things with a research project at the end. But in that
Mr.
book,
Kraft, let me interrupt just a second.
Sure.
You're at about 9 minutes in, and I've yet to hear a suggestion. I'm going to really encourage you to get to suggestions quickly because you're about out of time.
very good. I'm flexible. I'm an MBA. One group we need to include in reviews are the veterans. 750,000 veterans in Georgia, and they are poorly treated in our standards. Vietnam vet and patriotic groups, they need to be included in any review of new things. South Carolina just passed a founding documents bill, and I think that's something we need to emulate. Civics recommendations are in that book. Hillsdale College, there are a lot of experts we can utilize here. We need to break the bounds of the state as far as civics. Hillsdale College. So the first suggestion is we need a South Carolina-style civics bill, Founding Principles Act, as part of a required enhanced Georgia civics. And this is a required class for graduation from Georgia high schools and colleges of the university system. And when I say required, I mean it is required and cannot be opted out of to the liberal advanced placement classes.
All right, Mr. Kraft, I appreciate your time. You're over 10 minutes now, and I'm going to ask you to wrap it up with whatever other suggestions you have.
Okay. That's some implementation of that, who should be on the panel. And the second one is the BO needs to take a stand effective 2018 to the College Board. We are not going to rubber stamp your framework revisions. If you want to change government and civics AP, we need to have a full public hearing with crosswalks and everything involved, because every time AP changes standards from New York framework, they change Georgia standards, and I don't think that's right. I just turned 70, and some of you on the committee are catching up with me, and we might be
Not
the
far
last.
behind you.
Yeah. We might be the last generation.
I think I'm going to age 20 years this afternoon.
We might be the last generation that has a chance to change some of this. And I think we can do a lot more, especially for our veterans. And there's a lot more in the binder, light reading. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, and I do appreciate what you have to offer. And I've made some notes on what you've told us. I think you have some great ideas, some good solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Jane Robbins. Now, see, if I had given Mr. Kraft some of those minutes that others didn't use, I'd have to take minutes from you because he went over a little bit. So it all works out in the end.
Did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jane Robbins. I'm with the American Principles Project, which is an organization devoted to restoring our founding principles, and we are very glad that y'all are doing this, that you're taking a look at Georgia civics education. APP's interest in civics in this topic is that American students become well educated in the academic content of history, government, and civics. Students should leave school with a thorough understanding of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and our Federalist system, which protects not only state sovereignty but individual liberty. Transmission of this academic content should always be the primary focus of civics education in Georgia. Students should leave school with the realization that, as Calvin Coolidge said, to live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race. Now, the only reason that I'm up here today is to caution the committee against wholesale adoption of a new and, among progressives, very popular argument that civics should be focused less on this academic content and more on what is called action civics. That concept was advocated by President Barack Obama and his Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. And Mr. Duncan denigrated what he described as rote memorization of names, dates, and processes. Instead, he argued civics education should be student-centered and designed, in essence, not to teach students the fundamentals of their country and its government, but rather to create little community organizers who think critically about something. There is nothing wrong with encouraging students to get involved in the political process. Obviously, we want to do that, and other civic discussions in their communities, in their state. But when the action element of civics is elevated over the academic content, over the fundamental understanding of our founding principles and how they work and what they're designed to accomplish, we end up with young people eager to agitate but not sure what they're agitating about. I would suggest that we have enough unfocused and uninformed protest in this country as it is. Now, learning the fundamental facts of our government doesn't have to be boring rote memorization. And under a good teacher, it won't be. It can be a riveting story that endows students with the gift of understanding and appreciating their heritage. But the suggestion that learning these critical facts is somehow less important than learning how to take action is, in my view, profoundly wrong-headed. Now, I would like to just read a couple of sentences from a book that I recommend to all of you. It's called 7 Myths About Education. One of the myths is that in these days of Google, you don't need to know anything because you can just look it up. Now, it's the author here is a teacher from Great Britain, where they have the same struggles with progressive dogma that we do, and this is what she says. Critics of fact learning will often pull out a completely random fact and say something like, "Who needs to know the date of the Battle of Waterloo? Why does it matter?" Of course, pulling out one fact like this on its own does seem rather odd. But the aim of fact learning is not to learn just one fact. It is to learn several hundred, which taken together form a schema that helps you understand the world. Thus, just learning the date of the Battle of Waterloo will be of limited use, but learning the dates of 150 historical events from 3000 BC to the present day and learning a couple of key facts about why each event was important will be of immense use, because it will form the fundamental chronological schema that is the basis of all historical understanding. I think this explanation nails it, and I would add to this the observation of a weary professor who lamented that too many of the students that he sees are being taught to think critically about a fact should they ever encounter one. So I hope that you will resist any argument that Georgia civics education should downplay the transmission of actual knowledge in favor of critical thinking or action civics. And as an aside, I just wanted to mention that there is an egregious error in the Georgia social studies standards, in the 3rd grade standards. And I mentioned it on several occasions to multiple people who could have done something about it, but for some reason it escaped and it's still in there. So I just wanted to tell y'all about it so that maybe you can get it out of there. In the 3rd grade standards for government civic understandings, teachers are instructed to teach that the role of the judiciary is to, quote, determine if laws are fair, close quote. That is not at all what the judiciary is supposed to do. Courts are to determine if the laws are constitutional and correctly applied, not to determine if they're fair. That's the legislature's job. Allowing a judge to substitute his or her view of fairness for the legislature's view is how we end up with activist courts that are unmoored from the Constitution or from the law. It's how we end up with a lawless society. So I hope that we can get that error corrected. So thank you for considering these points and for serving our students.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just writing it down. 4 minutes and 58 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, she's a record keeper right now. But Ms. Tanya Diddy, you have an opportunity to see if you can beat her. I can do that. Great.
I don't want to be repetitive of things that people have said, so I'll try to be brief. My name is Tanya Diddy. I'm the State Director of Concerned Women for America of Georgia. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm also a certified educator. I've taught U.S. history, government, economics, geography, and civics, and I currently teach online economics with a current school system. And I really wasn't sure what the discussions were going to be today. And so I really took the approach that if we have an opportunity to strengthen civic standards, then I have recommendations for you on that. I know that we're seeing, as mentioned earlier, played out on TV and social media, these mob rioters seeking to silence speech, which, by the way, is impacting both parties. I don't think either party is immune to this now. And it's pretty easy to connect the dots between a mobster approach to protesting, to the lack of education and civics, and an appreciation for America, warts and all. This is why I think Georgia students, it's critical that they have these minimal foundational knowledge in the following core areas, and I'm going to rearrange this. These students need to know that we live in a republic, not a democracy. And that's what I was hearing from the Department of Education today. Democracy, democracy, we are a republic. And there's a huge difference between a republic and a democracy. We need to have a study of the history of the founding documents, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the three branches of government, the role of states, its citizens and economics, and a study of political parties, voting, and citizenship. And as was mentioned earlier, looking at other models of nonprofit organizations, I had a delightful conversation with Dr. Randall today. I didn't know he was with an organization of someone. I looked online and looked at their website, and I think it's great that we're employing and looking at organizations, but I would challenge the committee to look beyond that. I don't think the Department of Education should be zeroing in on one organization. I think it serves our citizens well if we look at a breadth of organizations and what they can offer. I think we need to work, we need to make the civic standards an open and transparent process, not behind closed doors at the Department of Education. We need to include parents and members of the community. We need to have a consideration for all comments given by the community at large, and I believe that civics education needs to reflect Georgia values. And I don't think sometimes that happens when the community and the public at large are closed out of the process. And I would make a comment, as Ms. Robbins did, the progressive education elites, they're writing a lot these days. I went out online just to look up civics, and the progressive elites, they're all over this. They feel this need all of a sudden to do civics education. And so I looked through the articles, and two things that were mentioned, and I'll just reiterate them that I think you need to be wary of, and that is this anti-rote rhetoric that's out there. They do believe that students, it's like child abuse if you do rote memorization, and this civics in action. Now, I was a high school teacher, and I loved to do civics in action as long as it was undergirded by education. That was the days when voting actually took place when we were in school, and we could take a field trip right down to where the people were voting in the school. These students don't have those opportunities, but I think that everything has to be undergirded by content knowledge and not just thrown out there with civics in action. So I'm going to end with this. I really, really appreciate this study committee. I was delighted when I saw the resolution come out. I thought, oh, great, we have an opportunity to try to change things around. And I know that you all are familiar with Benjamin Franklin's comment at the close of the Constitutional Convention when he was asked, well, doctor, what do we have, a republic or a monarchy? And of course, Franklin's response was, a republic if you can keep it. Our republic depends on informed and educated citizenry. Please, let's not let our republic fail and that we lose a republic on our watch. I don't want that to happen, and I really feel that we have an opportunity in Georgia to not make that happen. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Congratulations to you, by the way. You're the new record holder. At 4 minutes and 43 seconds. You beat out Ms. Robbins by 15 seconds. That's quite an accomplishment. Thank you very much. Next, we have Sita Cook.
Thank you, Chairman and Representatives. It's kind of nice to be back here. I did not come today with something prepared. I wanted to find out what was happening, and I might try to write something up. Two of you have heard me speak on some of these topics before. But what I wanted to say above all, and you may have heard me say this, is one of my concerns about citizenship, civics education. I should add, for those of you who don't know, I am a retired U.S. history teacher. I've taught both high school, community college, and at the University of West Georgia. So I did that for many decades, and I'm doing this after my retirement. One of my concerns that I've often said around the emphasis on CTAE, pathways, and preparing people for the job market, which I believe in. I'm not opposed to that. But I sometimes like to say, let's have all of our high school graduates ready for college, career, and citizenship. That somebody with skills that earns them a lot of money or skills that don't, like me, that still should be, I hope, voters, participants, neighbors. And I'm not saying that never happens, but every time I hear college and career without something added to it, I worry about some people thinking, okay, we're asked to stay within that narrow silo. So I hope that this will be kept in mind, how to make sure that that concept goes throughout our system. Speaking as somebody who is, I actually did teach some high school civics as well as U.S. history, that in these days when we hear from all sides the issue of fake news or other kinds of things, the ability to think critically, to read something, including primary documents, which sometimes people are concerned about because of what they say, but to be able to read things that were written by people from all sides, think about them, and decide, and for students to learn how to decide for themselves, not just off the top of their heads, not by some quick Googling something, but by figuring out how to do that so that once they do graduate, learn what media to follow, how to question, how to go and talk to legislators, how to come to these kinds of meetings. And then I think that we will have a much healthier society, man. There's a lot that I like about it now, but there's room for improvement. Beyond that, I'll think, as I said, I think I'm going to look back to what I've said before when similar resolutions and bills have come up and see what might be most useful, and then follow along. If you can let us know when you are having certain topics or things that you want to focus in more, so I don't go off all over the place. Okay. Thank you. I probably got the record now.
Any questions? You know what? Actually, I have to admit I forgot to start my stopwatch on that one. But I can tell you that you were the quickest. I just can't give you an official time. To answer that last question, I think what we'll focus on in our next meeting, and we do have one more person to speak, what we'll focus on the next meeting is consideration of what other states are doing and trying to get into more of what some of the other nonprofit civics education providers are currently doing in other states. So that's probably a good segue into our next presenter, Mr. Trammell from the Georgia Center for Civic Engagement. Mr. Trammell? And I'm remembering to start the watch this time.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and representatives. It's a joy to be with you here today. First off, I'm excited we're talking about civics. It's a great thing to talk about because civics ultimately becomes who we are as a people. And so I'm with the Georgia Center for Civic Engagement. Our sister organization, the State YMCA of Georgia, has been around since 1919, and we're not the gym or the village people. We are exclusively youth development. And we do this small thing every November called the Youth Assembly Program. Since 1946, we've been taking over the House and Senate chambers and doing a model legislature. To date, we've served more than 475,000 young Georgians through this program, including some names that you may find familiar. Senator Johnny Isaacson, former Governor Joe Frank Harris, former Secretary of State, now law school dean at Mercer, Kathy Cox, and our current backup ambassador to the United Nations, Kelly Eccles Curry. So we know a thing or two about educating young citizens to participation in their government. We did a longitudinal study about 5 years back of our alumni who participated in our program, and since 1919 we've served about 1 million Georgians, and we found that compared to the average Georgian, our student alumni are about 80% more likely to vote, more likely to participate in their communities by serving on boards, by running for office. We have Representative Buddy Hardin, Representative Michael Caldwell, a number of other fine members of your colleagues in the esteemed chamber. And but we also have a lot of good citizens, dads and moms and lawyers and dentists and folks who care and who are involved in their church, who are involved in their community. And so we continue, and we wanted to know, how can we serve our state better? So in 2013, I started my doctoral process in education, and my research was on civic education and how can we do what we do better. And how can we, as the YMCA and Center for Civic Engagement, inform our programs to come out with better outcomes? And what I discovered is what I termed in Georgia a civic literacy crisis. And of course, we've heard Waters World. Jay Leno made a fortune off of asking people on the street, who's the vice president, or who is this and that. So they have a lot at stake if we do this right, because they're going to lose some money. So what I discovered was this crisis. So what do? I call up and I got a meeting with then Dr. John Barge, State School Superintendent, and I said, we've got an issue. What can I do to help? And he said, there's two things that we need at the Department of Education. We need resources for our teachers, and we need more opportunities for our students. And I said, we've got you on the opportunity side. We've been working with schools since 1919. We'll figure out what to do with the teachers. At that time, I did not realize that the Carl Vinson Institute at the University of Georgia, which does a wonderful job training our legislators, our county commissioners, and our city officials, they had stopped at some point in time providing teacher training in government. And so that's one of the areas that we have started filling in. So in 2013, I established the Georgia Center for Civic Engagement. And our main focus is to educate and equip students to become active and participating citizens. We are very, very specific that we teach the process and not the politics. We figure that the politics will come soon enough for these young people. We teach that every student has a responsibility, and that is to be informed and involved. And there's really two parts of this equation of civics that I think we're talking about here. Number one is civic knowledge. What do you know? And then the second part is civic identity, which is, in my mind, or at least according to my research, divided in three areas. Citizen duty, that is, are you likely to vote? Are you likely to volunteer? Social responsibility, that is, I'm going to volunteer, I'm going to serve on my PTA, I'm going to pick up litter, the soft skills that we're talking about fall under this. And then political efficacy. Can I pick up the phone and call my state representative, Representative Christian Comer? Can I pick up the phone and call the governor's office? Do I feel like I can call Commissioner Nancy Jester? So those are the three ideas. What we can teach in our schools is civic knowledge. We can equip the students with every fact there is to know. What we need help with is developing citizen identity, and that's going to look different from every one of our students. I will say in my closing remarks that I was a part of the recent review and precision review of the standards of the social studies. There was about 1,000 individuals involved with that. So you're not talking about an elite committee. There was 1,000 individuals that were involved, and they were from all walks of life. They were from all degrees of education. You had educators, you had community representatives, you had parents, you had school board members. There was a lot of people involved. And what I can say is that as we were grappling with everything that the students needed to know, it was a process that took everybody's opinion into play. There was a review process that students or that parents got to look, educators got to look at. There was even a traveling, I guess you could call it, road show where these items were displayed for public review. And the challenge with social studies is that it's a book that is being added to every day. In fact, in the 3 minutes, I guess this meeting will be part of the history of Georgia. Math, if you know how to get 4 + 4 = 8, that's relatively simple. So there's not a lot that's added to it. So as history continues, we have to determine what we are going to teach and what we're not going to teach. Another challenge that we have, like Miss Diddy said earlier, or not Miss Diddy, Miss Sita said, was we have a strong focus right now on CTAE, which is workforce readiness. We also have an incredible push for STEM, science, technology, engineering. Sometimes that's at the detriment of other things like civics. I want to commend our teachers. They're doing a wonderful job. They do a great job with our students. I'm proud to be associated with them, to work with them. And I want to pledge to this committee that I will be happy to work with you, sharing our expertise, what we found through our research. We did look at what the other states are doing. And Georgia's not leading the way, and that makes me sad. But it's also an opportunity for us to change that. I serve on a number of national boards with the YMCA. We have 40 states that do the model legislature as we do here in Georgia, and I'm one of the officers of that group. So again, I pledge my service to you all to help make Georgia better for all of us, but to make our students better for Georgia. Thank you.
Any questions? All right. I have nobody else signed up to speak. Did we miss anybody? Okay. I did have one question for Dr. Dooley, if you don't mind. And you can just step to the podium there. I was listening to Commissioner Jester talk about the curriculum that her children have had in their school system, and it was interesting to me that she did describe these 9 individuals that are part of the curriculum. I'm just curious, because of the debate that happened following that, can you tell us who does make the decision about which people in history her children are learning about for the civics education program in her school?
Yes.
Okay.
So curriculum is determined by the local districts, but we do name names in the standards. And during the standards review process that Dr. Trammell was talking about, where we had all of those committees working, they had somewhat involved conversations about which names would need to be on there. At some point, we were talking about, well, should we even be naming names? Because it's always somewhat contentious.
Sure.
But they did determine that they did want to have particular names on there because of the testing that has to happen in relation to those end of grade assessments. So the teachers decided, and in the precision review process, there's 3 committee processes. There's a survey prior, and in fact, we did 2 rounds of surveys prior to the development of these particular standards. In that process, they determined that they wanted to keep names, and that working committee developed the first list of names, and then that went through 2 following committees as well as state board approval.
So do I understand correctly then that the state sort of sets out a master list, and then local curriculum is decided which of those, or is that the state has those 9 are the state's names?
In the standards, and I'll send you these standards. In the standards, sometimes in some standards it's maybe 5 names, in some standards it's 2, in some standards it may be 9. They do name some names in the standards. Those are considered to be the sort of minimum, because if you're a teacher and you're learning about something like, the history of government during the 1950s, you may need to know certain people, but then the teacher may take precedence and add more. But in the standards, the way that they were written, it's sort of the minimum number of names that should be on there were determined by the committees. And again, that's because when the test comes at the end of the year, the teachers were saying we need to know who the kids would need to know about at minimum.
So it is a state standard that third graders have to learn about Cesar Chavez.
I'd have to look at the standards themselves, but yes, I know Cesar Chavez is one of the names on one of the standards.
Okay. And so that list of 9 it comports with your understanding of what the state requirement is.
I'd have to, again, look at the exact standards because I don't know about that list of 9 because we
Okay.
have several lists. But yes, we do have standards
Well,
that
let me
name
ask you about that,
particular
because
names.
you said we have several lists. So that's the part I'm trying to,
Oh, I'm
that's
sorry.
part of what I'm trying to figure
So-
out. Is there just a list of people that is going to the local school and you
No.
say, okay, school, these are the ones you have to teach about?
No, so when
Okay.
the schools, when the schools look at their standards, in third grade, you may have, 10, 12 standards. Those standards have elements, which are just further descriptors. And so in the standards themselves, that's where the names would be, in the standards and elements, that's where the names would be written. But there is no master list of these are all the names you have to know.
Well, and I didn't understand there was a master list of 100 names that you had to know, but what I'm trying to get at is, and I still don't understand the answer.
Okay.
There's, how did that list of 9 names get to that third grade classroom curriculum?
It's written in the standards.
Okay, so those 9 names were selected by the state.
I'm just hesitant to say it's those 9 names because I
Uh-huh.
don't know exactly which standard she's talking about.
Is there more than one?
There are more than one standards in grades K through 12 that have particular names associated with them,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, yeah, you're not helping me.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well,
If you can tell me what standard it is, I'd be happy to look it up and tell you exactly what names they
okay,
are.
we can figure that out between now
Okay.
and the next meeting. I just want to, if it's a completely if it's a local decision for that county to decide which, American historical figures to talk about, then fine, let the local, we'll live within that framework. But if we're saying that the state has dictated that these are the individuals that every school will learn about, then I can see where people in my district are not going to be happy with that list. And neither would I, frankly. I think it's not a great list. I can think of a lot better people to include on the list. Not necessarily Ronald Reagan, but maybe George Washington. So, yeah. Mr.
As,
Coleman.
as working with the curriculum in Gwinnett, and as Mr. Kraft, as you know, you're right. The state does, and I've been on these review committees for years. They come out with recommendations. Here's a standard. Here's some people that that you could use. That's for people that have no creativity, no idea. But then in Gwinnett County, we may want to add somebody like Bud Gwinnett. We may want to add George Walton. We may want to add Evan Howell, our local people. We want to leave it up to them. That's what we did.
Yeah.
But just to get that standard across, the standard of who is involved in forming government. Well, on the national level this, but in Gwinnett County, we used our local people, and then and since there is no end of course test, we mostly, have the right to add those. But you're right, there may be 1 or 2 people, if I'm correct, that you think are so critical that we have to, well, that's one we list. But they're given ideas.
Yeah.
But again, as Mr. Kraft can say, because he's talked about this, he's there every board meeting. The local materials they use are selected by the local systems to teach those standards. And they may be, and that was your concern, be skewed this way or skewed that way, whatever they're trying to. Is that not correct? That's.
Well, and I don't want to.
I don't want to rein him in. I was just saying that.
I don't want to. Yeah, I want to keep this discussion up here.
That's what I'm saying.
What I understand is that, and again, I'm the last guy to the party. So you guys have all done this for a long time, and not me. But what I understand from that is, the state creates this set of standards, and let's for the sake of this discussion say it's those 9 names that Commissioner Jester listed. And if those 9 names are the 9 names the state puts out, those are the names that are going to be tested on as far as the state goes. There may be additional names that can be added locally based on local teachers and local curriculum boards' interest. But
there
then,
might be one more piece of information that would be helpful.
okay,
When we were going through the standards revision process for the Georgia Standards of Excellence, we were still under the mindset that we had end of grade assessments across all of social studies. So when the teachers were developing those standards, they were saying, if you're going to test me on it, I want to know what you're going to test my kids
Yeah.
on.
sure.
So they asked specifically for those pieces of information. And in fact, when we were going through that process, there were so many names and so many, rivers and towns and all these kinds of things that when the teachers were going through that process, they were actually trying to dial it back to the very bare minimum so that the teachers at the local level would have the flexibility to add what they wanted to. Now that we don't have testing in social studies until 5th grade, there's even more flexibility. And so whether or not we change standards, I don't know, but I would say that there's a lot more flexibility at the local level to look at those names or not look at those names because they aren't necessarily being tested like they were 3 years ago.
Okay, that is helpful. Representative Chandler.
Caitlin, this is a similar question.
Sure.
Who made the decision for history not to be taught in a linear manner? Is that a state decision or is that a local decision?
So I think that might be a misconstruction of, or a misinterpretation of how we intend for history to be taught. And so in the standards, so for example, in a course, there is a chronicle sequence to how it's taught. And then the themes come through as well. But the chronology of history is still maintained in those courses. Now, in the way that the standards are written. When a teacher gets those standards, they don't have to teach the standards in order. They can take a standard from the top of the list, they can take a standard in the bottom of the list, and they can mix them in however they want when they're doing instruction. So if you just look at a course itself, you will see chronology built into the standards, but then the delivery of those standards can be done in a non-sequential way. If you look at the way the courses are laid out, though, someone might say, okay, well, why are you going to, international history in 6th and 7th grade, and then you're going back to Georgia in 8th, and then you're going to, U.S. history in high school? That doesn't seem very sequential at all, and it's not. But the way that has been built, and this isn't something that we did with the new GSEs, we tweaked it a little bit, but this is how Georgia social studies have been taught over the years, is you're basically somewhat spiraling curriculum. So you're revisiting different historical elements and different historical themes across time, because the developmental capacity when you're in 3rd grade to understand some of these things is a little different than when you're in 5th or when you're in 8th or when you're in high school. So that those 4 domains that you pointed out, and especially in civics, you'll see the concepts grow over time as they're revisited across different grades. Thank you. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Chairman Coleman.
We held, and I think y'all attended, about 10 hearings in the last 3 years throughout the state talking about flexibility, whatever, looking at reading, looking at history, social studies. And Mr. Chairman, one thing that was very obvious, just take reading for instance. We used to have in this state years ago 2 reading series. You had to teach this way. Phonetical approach, you had to teach it this way. You had to use 2 books. You had to use them. Everybody had various levels. You could only put so many children in a class at one time. That's why we recommend, could never teach more than 3 levels at one time. What we've done, same thing with civics and whatever. We said we teach history this way. You teach this in a sequential order. Be sure you covered the Native Americans. You covered the Western expansion, all of that. But what we've done, we've developed, am I not correct, as we've progressed, and I don't know that this is good or bad, because teachers are crying right now, we heard in these hearings, we wish we had a reading series, because you've got them teaching whole language, you've got to teach them phonics, and you've got some systems doing a great job, some not, depending on where they are. And that's where we've moved, if I'm not correct. Same thing with civics. We said these standards have to be taught, but we're allowing them to integrate them in various other ways. And we've gone to this flexibility as far as materials and whatever, and that was the confusion a lot of them have, and a lot of teachers still don't realize that they have the flexibility, and they've added a lot of the local stuff. Would you not agree that that's part of maybe the confusion? I mean,
think that it's probably part of the confusion. I don't think Georgia's unique in that. As we look at the changes in the publishing industry because of the digital transformation of society, where we don't have textbooks being produced in the same
Right.
rate, we see publishing industries, that whole industry is turning over as we introduce more digital resources. So this is not unique to Georgia that we have
No, it's-
more and more curricular materials available, more and more digital resources available, and it's put more on the teacher to have to organize that. That's difficult. At the same time, I see Georgia's educational outcomes increasing. We've significantly increased our National Assessment of Educational Progress outcomes over the last 10 years, and Georgia's seen as one of the national leaders. So while I agree that it's difficult sometimes for us to understand the plethora of resources that we have, I don't see it as a detrimental thing to most of our students in Georgia because of the increases that we see in our outcomes.
But I think the main thing we need to be sure this committee, I hope we look at, there's certain things people want,
And we are, so,
and certain people they want them to know,
Yeah.
and certain things about the branches of government, whatever. And I think we just need to be sure those are in there, and we stress those, and they're not, we don't slip them in there. And that's what people are concerned about. We're greasing those in, but be sure they're emphasized. I think that's what we're saying.
I would agree.
Anything else? All right. Well, thank you very much. We will reach out to everybody with, or I guess we'll just post when our next meeting is going to be. We don't have that scheduled yet, but we'll make sure to make that public. Plenty of advance notice for everybody. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.